In this Elden Ring video, I'm going to be diving into the changes to builds that I have made previously because of patch 1.07. A lot of them have been affected in one way or another, whether they've been improved or decreased. And in this video, I just want to run you through some of my more recent builds as well as some of my older builds, kind of give you some insight on what I would change on those builds now. So if you're using those builds and you're wondering if they're still viable, what differences should I make, then this is the video to watch. So let's start off with the Sanguine Spellblade build. This is the most recent build that I did that was sort of an Arcane Intelligence caster build that used the Aberrant Sorceries or Briars of Sin and Briars of Punishment. Both of these were buffed in patch 1.07 so that their casting speeds are faster and their bleed buildup is stronger, which means that you should trigger Hemorrhage more often when casting these spells, and you should be able to use them more easily, which is fantastic. The nerf to this build is that seppuku is pretty goddamn nerfed. In my testing today with it on the occult settings, same settings I had for this build, I couldn't even trigger blood loss without like 6 or 7 hits with Roger's Rapier at 80 arcane. So what I recommend doing here is actually swapping your Roger's Rapier to blood with seppuku on it, because seppuku is still really nice for triggering the attack power boost of Lord of Blood's Exaltation and White Mask if you have those equipped. So you're still going to get those damage increases, which will benefit your spells by triggering it. And it'll give you an option to set bleeding in a pinch. Your overall melee damage will be lower, but you'll still be able to trigger bleeding regular easily with your melee attacks. And it's obviously not the focus of this build like it was in the Crimson Duelist build. So it still works fairly well. So your trade-off is your spell casting is a bit stronger, but your melee is a bit weaker. It comes out to be about the same. Moving on to the Black Arrow build. This is a bow build that I just made. There should be no changes to this build. Nothing was affecting the talismans or spells or abilities we're using for this, so this should remain exactly the same. Moving along to the Drake Knight build, the Magna Guillotine ability that we use in this build has had its poise damage increased and its stamina damage increased against guarding enemies of the first attack. So this is actually slightly stronger than it was before. It was already deadly in terms of damage, so this is just going to give it more poise damage and more stamina damage against blocking targets. So that's really the only change there. Moving along to the Crimson Duelist build, the biggest change here obviously is that seppuku was nerfed, so because we were using the occult affinity, I don't recommend using that any longer. What I would suggest doing instead is setting it to the blood affinity and skewing your stats between dexterity and arcane in order to keep your damage as high as possible while still remaining that style of play. Your bleed buildup will be a little bit less than it was with this setup, and your damage will be a little bit lower, but you should still be able to trigger bleeding rather regularly, and it still remains a very, very potent way of playing. Moving along to the Starscourge build, where we use the Starscourge Greatsword, there aren't really too many changes to this build. The only real difference is I've tested the sword. I can't tell if the changes to Colossal Sword attack speed or the poise damage affect this weapon specifically because it's paired. I don't think that they do. I can't tell if it is. It's very minimal. So if it is affecting it, it should be more effective than it is before. If not, it'll remain exactly the same. And the only other difference is that Radagon's armor set will now have 72 poise instead of 60. That shouldn't affect this build too much because it's already over the breakpoint of 51 poise. So you'll have a little bit more poise, but it's not really going to make too much of a difference to this build. Moving along to the Pyromancer build, all 4 of the major spells, damage-dealing spells for this build have been buffed. That's Burn, O Flame, Flame of the Fell God, Flame Fall Upon Them, and Giant's Flame Take Thee. All 4 of these spells have had their FP cost reduced, and Flame of the Fell God and Flame Fall Upon Them have had their stamina damage increased against blocking targets. Additionally, Burn O Flame's pillar summoning is faster. This is one of the downsides of this spell, is that it took so long to get those pillars up. Now this is going to be shortened the time to do this, so that should make that more effective as well. And lastly, Flame of the Fell God's had its attack power increased when charged. This thing already hit like a truck, so that's good to know. And also the time that it takes between fire ticks for the fire damage that it leaves on the ground will be shortened. At least that's my understanding of it. So you should see more damage from that residual fire that's left on the ground after the spell is cast. So overall, this build got even stronger. It was already extremely deadly, so it's just even more deadly now. Moving along to the Slumbering Swordstress build, probably the biggest change here is that there is now a reduction to status effect buildup when you're dual wielding. I don't know exactly how much this translates to with this build, but you should notice a decrease in the speed that sleep builds up. So relying on Mists of Slumber more often is going to be very vital for this build, and it should be a little bit less effective than it was before, even though it shouldn't be that much less effective. Moving along to the Golden Sword Sage build, a lot has changed with this one. First up, Triple Rings of Light has had its cast speed increased, so it's going to be easier to cast this spell, which is great. Discus of Light, pretty much the bread and butter spell of this build, has had its FP cost reduced and stamina consumption reduced, making it easier to chain spam. It's increased the range, speed, and duration of the Halo, as well as its cast speed, so you should be able to sling these a lot faster, making it even better. Radagon's Rings of Light has had its FP consumption cost reduced and its recovery time reduced. This is great because sometimes you need to cast it back to back to wipe out a pack of enemies, making that easier to do. And it was very expensive FP-wise, so that's a good change as well. Additionally, the FP cost of Elden Stars has been reduced, so that should be less expensive to cast as well. There are some changes to the weapons as well. The Unblockable Blade ability of Coated Sword has its FP cost reduced and its motion speed increased, meaning it's going to be easier to use this ability and you're going to be able to use it more efficiently since it'll be less expensive. And when you are using the Sword of Night and Flame for this build, the Night and Flame stance has had its attack power increased. It's had attack direction adjustments, making it easier to aim up and down. This was a big problem with the Night Comet beam of it. And it's added damage detection to the weapon part of this ability, meaning that like if you swing your sword for the fire part, or you thrust your sword for Night Comet, if you connect with the enemy with the sword, that will actually deal its own separate damage as well, increasing the damage of this from point-blank range. Taking a look at the Sword Saint build, nothing should really change much here. We're using dual greatswords, so nothing should impact that. Wave of Gold was not changed. The other incantations we're using are Golden Fowl and Flame Grant Me Strength and whatever else you wanted. So any of those spells you wanted will vary, but neither Golden Vow nor Flame Grant Me Strength changed, nor did Sword of Milos, to my knowledge. So those should remain the same. Really, the only difference with this build would be in the armor. It would probably be easier to get higher poise armor now, so that's probably going to make this build a bit better in general. Next up is the Godslayer build, where we're using Godslayer's Greatsword. Really, the changes to this build, meaning you're going to get more poise damage when you two-hand the Godslayer's Greatsword, based on the fact that they're increasing poise damage when you're two-handing a Colossal or any weapon, really. So that will apply here. I don't know if the attack speed of this weapon has increased. I haven't tested it out, but theoretically, it could be more effective based on the changes they've made to Colossal Swords or some Colossal Swords. So potentially, it could be more effective, but minimally, it'll remain the same. So it's at least as good or better as it was that before in that department. Other changes are the changes to poise on armor. You probably don't need to use the Bull Goat set for this at this point because you'll be able to get poise much more easily, which will reduce the amount of weight you need and endurance you need for this build in order to, be able to meet it so you're not like overweight, which should make it easier to put this build together in general. But otherwise, the build shouldn't change that much, and you shouldn't see any changes really in the way that it plays other than possibly slightly faster attack speed and maybe some more staggers on bosses with regular R1 attacks. Admittedly, you're going to be using the Queen's Black Flame on them more often than not, so that's not something you're probably going to see a whole lot of. Up next, we have the Soul Samurai build. Really, the only changes to this build come in the form of the spells. Great Blade Phalanx has had its FP cost reduced. Founding Rain of Stars has had its FP cost reduced, as well as the speed at which the rain begins after you cast the spell, so this should trigger faster. And the range at which you can cast this is also longer, making that more effective as well. Loretta's Great Bow has had its FP cost reduced, and Freezing Mist has had its Frostbite build-up status effect increased, so this should be more effective as well. So really, this whole build just got a huge buff, making it even more deadly, and it was already deadly before. Moving along to the Mad King build, really the changes here are to Unendurable Frenzy and Frenzied Burst. Unendurable Frenzy has had its FP cost reduced. It's had its damage reduced in PvP, but this was not a PvP build. So it's going to be more effective in PvE, but less effective in PvP. And Frenzied Burst has actually had its damage increased if you charge it, as well as its poise damage. So it's only going to be more effective in PvE as well. This thing was already deadly from so far. Going to be even more deadly now. Really, the only other change to this build is that Curved Greatswords in general are getting poise increase to some of their attacks. So you should deal more poise damage with this weapon in general, but we don't know exactly how much. So moving along to the Carian Cavelier build, this is a build where we use Loretta's War Sickle. This Ash of War specifically has been buffed. Loretta's Slash here, this version. Its attack power has been increased, which is great because it wasn't on par with the regular version. The damage of the first attack has been increased, and its overall poise damage has been increased, making this build much better than it was before, which is great. Additionally, the poise of the Royal Knight set has been increased from 51 to 53. This doesn't change a whole lot with this build. You could pull out the Bull Goat's Talisman if you want. You have enough poise as it is, so you could put something else there like Ritual Sword Talisman, for instance, to give you more damage when you're at full health. Or you could put any other talisman there that you want, like the Green Turtle Talisman, to give you faster stamina recovery would also not be a bad choice. Additionally, Freezing Mist has better Frostbite buildup, so that's going to be more effective when you cast that at the beginning of boss fights. So you shouldn't have to wait as long for that, Frostbite status effect to kick in and enemies to be debuffed. So up next we have the Waterfowl Warrior build. Really the only changes to this build are that you're going to be two-handing the katana most of the time. This should deal more poise damage now, which is great because of the changes to poise damage when two-handing weapons. So that should be good for this build. And really the only other change I can think of that was probably made here, although I can't test it because I don't have the save for this anymore, is that the Clean Rot armor set probably has more poise now. Most armor sets do by at least a few points. This one had 48 before. Hopefully it hit that 41 breakpoint, meaning that you can poise through at least one attack when you're doing your normal attacks. Waterfowl Dance, of course, has hyper armor on it if you can get far enough into the animation, so that was never an issue. But your regular attacks should possibly be able to poise through if you're using the Clean Rot armor set. Otherwise, it'll just be easier to hit that 51 breakpoint for poise if you're mixing and matching other pieces with it. And then lastly, we come to the Blackblade build. The first notable thing here is that the Blackblade incantation has had its stamina consumption reduced. It has improved turning performance and shortened recovery time, allowing you to aim it a little bit better. The sword and the wave attack have been changed so that they hit at the same time. And the attack power, stamina attack power, and poise damage of each part have been decreased. And it's decreased the number of times the wave part hits large enemies, so it's not going to pass through them and hit them multiple times. So it's been buffed in some ways and nerfed in others. So generally speaking, you should get similar performance. It should be easier to use this, but it probably won't be as strong when it lands as it would have been before. But it should be easier to land. And again, I don't know if Malakath's Blackblade's Colossal Sword, because it is a Colossal Sword, has been increased or impacted by this build. You do get more poise damage with two-handed attacks when using it, which is great. However, we don't tend to two-hand it all that often because it doesn't really increase the damage we do. But you might want to consider doing that for the poise damage. I don't know if the attack speed has actually been increased on this or not. Obviously, it hasn't been decreased. So, it's not like it's going to perform worse, but it may actually perform better. You may be able to attack faster with this weapon. Additionally, Destined Death, which is the weapon skill of Malakath's Blackblade, has had its motion speed increased, which means it should fire off faster, which is, thank God, because it took forever. And the duration of the effect that reduces the maximum HP should be increased. This is the same with Blade of Death. So it should be easier to take the Blackblade incantation and Destined Death and stack these HP reduction things. Because if you didn't know, you can have two of these at a time on an enemy. If you get them up at the same time, their max health will be reduced by 20%. And then when those debuffs expire, their health will not go back up. So you want to make sure you trigger them both at the same time if possible. Otherwise, you'll have 10%. It'll wear off, and then you'll hit with the other one, and it'll have 10%, which will do nothing. Another remarkable change with this build is that Malakath's armor set has had its poise increased from 40 to 51, which is kind of the breakpoint for regular attacks. So you should be able to poise through regular attacks with this build, making it even more deadly than it was before. So that wraps up our video on our NG Plus builds, or our latest builds and how they're impacted. If I did every single build, I have over 80 builds for this game. This would be a 1 hour plus long video. So I can possibly do end game builds next. If you guys would like, let me know in the comments. And obviously we need to get out updated versions of some of the level 150 builds that haven't gotten those for a long time. So that's definitely the plan. We also have a Death Mage build coming that's an NG Plus build. Obviously, I need to go check that out and update it a little bit before we publish it now due to the changes. Kind of glad I waited because I was going to publish it yesterday. But that's going to be even more effective because death spells got buffed. All the death spells did. So I can't wait to get that video out and show you guys how effective that build is now. So what do you guys think? Should I do all the other builds? Should I do the endgame builds as well? That could be a fairly long video. I have about double the number that I do NG+. What about other builds updated? Would you guys like to see just more unique builds with some of the, new Ash of War changes and spell changes? Or would you prefer if I went back and updated old builds? Or would you just rather have one video or two videos that kind of walk you through the changes to those builds? Let me know in the comments below.
Bye.